Hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, Twitter is where all intelligent political discourse goes to die. I swear. The 130 plus character format, I don't know exactly what the format is on Twitter, how many word counts you're allowed, but the very limiting format, the nature of emotionalism that courses through the consciousnesses of so many Twitter users on both sides of the political aisle, the political spectrum, is just absolutely insufferable. But unfortunately, these mediums are necessary to dispense with certain knowledge these days to reach an audience. But on Twitter today, libertarians are trending. Libertarians are trending about their opposition to the vaccine passport idea that are coming out of the halls of medical intelligentsia. And here are just some of the responses that libertarians are getting for their aversion to having this sort of standardized credential bequeathed upon them by private authorities to show that they are indeed a legitimate being fit for public intercourse, fit for public commercial intercourse, rather. Now, it should be important to understand that these sentiments are arising from Justin Amash's tweet. Justin Amash's tweet says, "No vaccine passport." This was made 18 hours ago. "It doesn't get much more dystopian than being required to show your health papers wherever you go." This started a firestorm, and now here are some of the responses that Mr. Amash is getting. From Asha Reng Appa, I hope I'm saying that correctly, who is a Yale Law School lecturer, former associate dean of Yale Law School, a CNN commentator who's been all across the media. She said, "Interesting that so-called libertarians focus exclusively on their individual freedom, but never on the cost of the negative externalities of their freedom, whether it's seatbelts, guns, masks, vaccines, and a refusal to act in the common interest impose a significant cost." Now, this is, of course, one tweet in a very long screed about how libertarians don't care about gun violence and other things. And of course, Asha here is just making a sort of a non sequitur here, right? There is absolutely no relation between me caring about my individual freedom and me not caring about how my individual freedom affects other people. In fact, if you actually read the natural law tradition, which is where the libertarian idea of freedom comes from, if you actually read John Locke, other people are actually intimately involved in the securing of your freedom. And other people are actually intimately involved in the protection of their own rights. So guess what, Asha? You're starting your argument on a false conception, a non sequitur, and a straw man that makes no sense whatsoever. But this video is not about you, Asha, so I'm not going to even go and talk about your nonsense. But that's one of the responses. The Palmer Report, which I don't watch at all, I don't like at all. The Palmer Report says right-wingers and libertarians spent the entire pandemic whining and crying because they didn't want to do their part to keep the country safe. Now they're whining and crying because they have to get vaccinated. They're just selfish effing babies. Well, Palmer Report, I have news for you. We spent our time in 2020 being angry that states were seizing control of the economy, shutting down businesses, building their prescriptions for our own health off of false data or off of data that was not fully complete. Fauci saying, hey, wear a mask, and saying don't wear a mask, saying wear a mask. The CDC saying, okay, 6 feet is the distance, and no one else finding that 12 feet, the virus spreads up to 12 feet. I mean, those are the reasons why libertarians were upset, because our liberties were under attack, number one, by the lockdowns, by the shutdowns, by the mask mandates. Then the reason to attack our liberties were not even based upon any kind of semblance of truth. They were based upon miscalculations that we didn't really get right until a very long time afterwards. So there are so many more responses equating libertarians to being Anglo-privileged or whatever the hell. And this is just a microcosm of the lack of intellectual integrity that is bound up in the mind of so many people on the left and so many people who have this ubiquitous notion, this amorphous notion of the common good, of the common interest. Well, evidently, by this display here, the common good or the common interest don't necessarily exist. Those are simply buzzwords to unite what appears to be in the interest of everyone without actually understanding how much individual interest plays into this entire role here. But also, my friends, it's not just libertarians who are opposing the vaccine passport credentials. British pubs Britain is not a libertarian country. British pubs, people in Britain are opposing it on consequentialist grounds, right? They're opposing it because they don't want their employees to get involved into a very bitter battle over civil liberties, and they don't think that that's going to be good for their business. The ACLU is opposing this. Now, they're opposing it through a racial justice paradigm. Libertarians are not into group identity or group justice. We're into individuals and individualism. So we don't agree with the racial justice paradigm typically, unless you're left libertarian. In that case, you go do you, man. I don't go do you. But anyway, but even the ACLU is opposing this. The WHO is saying, oh, well, this could have consequences. This may not be effective for international travel. There's so much criticism coming towards these ideas from so many different levels that it is disingenuous. And again, it is a straw man and a reflection of one's disdain for the principle of human liberty that you would dare try to append all of the criticism on the vaccine passports onto libertarianism. That is a lie from the pit of hell, and it cannot succeed in the presence of us who are being epistemically righteous and humble in understanding these things. We do our research, people. We don't buy into lies. We don't buy into falsehoods. We don't buy into hysteria. We don't buy into this kind of stuff. So what are the problems with the vaccine passports? I'll give you a few problems with them. Number one, the vaccine passports, as I mentioned before, are using, according to the WHO, possibly using unholistic data to be formed. Here's what I mean by that. The WHO is very clear that with variations of the coronavirus, it may be foolish to think that the vaccines we have right now are universally protective, and that having a passport is just one step to going back to living a normal life. So there's a knowledge problem here, an epistemological error here that we could possibly be making. Now, it's potentially possible, as many medical professionals expect, that, hey, once we get the vaccine, the variations will not have any effect on us. Hey, that's good. But we have to operate in epistemological humility, epistemic humility here. But this is not doing that. This is making a single decision before we have all the information. That's number one. Number two, people are saying, oh, this is simply a private action, Christian. This is simply a private action. Here's what it really is, my friends. Here's what it really is. It is a quasi-public-private partnership coming from the throes, coming from the annals of the White House. Now, many are saying, okay, they're leaving it to the private sector. That's not true. They're not leaving it to the private sector. What they're doing is this. Jen Psaki said that the government is going to stay out of it. But in the process of staying out of it, so to speak, they're going to guide the private sector, as they said right here, drive the market towards meeting public interest goals. Now, we have established before that public interest, common good, all of these buzzwords really mean nothing. They're simply maneuvers to overtake our individualism, overtake our individual liberty, make us part of this sort of amorphous blob of people. Jean-Jacques Rousseau called it the general will, the idea that I don't live for myself, I live for the general will, I live for everyone else, I live for this sort of blob, this sort of thing, this sort of group that we measure the goodness of society by. That's where these terms come from, and it's also why I don't like the term public health. Health is an inherently private thing, my friends. But anyway, that's why I don't like this term. So yes, it's correct. The government is not creating a single universalized metric by which to measure these things, but the government is absolutely involved in the formulation of both credentials, criteria, and form of how this vaccine ID system is going to go. The government is absolutely involved. Now, my friends, this does two things. Number one, it shows that the public interest is actually the interest of the government, which is actually not a public interest. If you understand public choice economics, you understand the government itself is an actor that has its own interest at heart and will use its own interests to stay alive, to stay in the game. Why do you think members of Congress raise their pay? Why do you think spending happens continuously? Why do you think earmarks exist? At the very basic fundamental level of political activity within the institution of the government is a sort of parasitic infatuation, a sort of parasitic fetish with taking out people's stuff and repurposing that stuff to fit the narrow aims of the government. Man, are you guys hearing me right now? We see this kind of stuff. We see, oh, private sector, and we think benign. The private sector can do evil things, my friend, and I can believe that the private sector has a right to do evil things, as Amash said, but still denounce those evil things with my private voice right here. I'm not saying put legislation in to stop the developing of vaccine passports, but I am saying let's understand the depths to which this goes. The government is absolutely involved. No matter how much Jen Psaki or the Biden bureaucrats want to make it seem as if the government is not involved, the government is absolutely involved in this endeavor. Perniciously. So it represents the government's private interests, and number two, it interferes with the market. This is back to my quasi-public-private partnership distinction here. So a public-private partnership between the government and businesses typically involves subsidies, and it involves grants, stuff like that. Think Sally Mae, all that kind of stuff. And those typically end in disaster. When you insulate a institution from the market forces, that tends to lead to disaster because the institution then thinks they can do superpower stuff. The institution thinks they can lend out loans that people can't pay back. And then when they can't pay them back and the market crashes, they'll be like, oh, well, we're too big to fail. Because we made you too big to fail. We created you. We repurposed you for this divine ideal of the unpayable loan, for this divine ideal of the egalitarian system. And we tried to, as Vogelin would say, and as Buckley interpreted Vogelin, immanentize the eschaton of having free and fair housing, equitable housing to everyone. We tried to immanentize that down into the earth through the sort of lending to people who can pay them back. And look what happened. The earth, reality struck back. Whenever you strike reality, it strikes back. Whenever you strike reality, it hits you 10,000-fold back. There are laws that are immutable to this universe that, guess what? You cannot immute, that you cannot do anything to. So they're not doing that here. But what the government is doing here, in terms of the public-private partnership, they are asserting their influence. And that presents a power dynamic imbalance. If a private company was left to develop this system by itself, they would be more susceptible to the whims of their customers, to the whims of their shareholders, to the whims of their consumers. But the fact that the government is getting involved, developing criteria, and kind of pushing them along, that makes it seem beneficial to other companies to get involved in this system. And then when that happens, the market quickly consolidates under the government's ideal of what it wants it to do. And so you have the exact same effect of a public-private partnership. You have adverse government influence, which is an aberration of the free market. You have that kind of stuff, but it's in a more benign-appearing way. But guess what? What it looks like is not always what it is, my friends. We can appear benign. We can appear very good. We can appear benevolent. But guess what? What lies beneath? There is an arcana, as Emanuel Swedenborg, that brilliant mystic, said. There's an arcana of knowledge that is inherent to an aspect of every single thing we do, but the arcana is being ignored by proponents of this vaccine passport nonsense. If this was truly a private sector effort, companies would not do it. Especially companies in the American South, where a lot of people are very adverse about this kind of stuff. It's not a private sector effort. It is ostensibly a private sector effort. Get that in your head. This is ostensibly. Say it with me. This vaccine passports are ostensibly a private sector effort. Say it with me. Put it in the comments below. Get that message out there. My friends, it's also important to realize this same article says that Joe Biden did sign an executive order directing federal agencies to see how feasible it would be to connect COVID-19 vaccines to vaccine cards. Consistent with applicable law, the Secretary of State, HHS, and Homeland Security in coordination with any relevant international agencies, shall assess the feasibility of linking COVID-19 vaccination to international certificates of vaccination or prophylaxis, however you say that, and producing electronic versions of ICPVS. So yes, my friends, there is a foundation for government action in this regard. But Biden has probably realized, okay, it's best for me not to strong-arm these people because it would probably lead to my political demise, or I would have severe legal challenges. Because guess what, my friends? The Biden administration, they are calculating the fact that President Trump has nominated hundreds upon hundreds of federal judges, and they are up against a conservative Supreme Court. Why do you think Joe Biden is not forcing states to do mask mandates quite yet? He's asking them to. He's saying, please, you have to. Why do you think he's not mandating it federally? Why do you think he's letting the private sector do this? Joe Biden is not a libertarian. Joe Biden does not believe in the power of the private sector. Joe Biden is an opportunist. Joe Biden is a foul opportunist, and he is doing this because he knows that if he does anything else, he could potentially jeopardize his agenda. Because there is a liberty bench, a bench that is going to be originalist and textualist that would be against what he's doing. Am I talking to somebody today? Am I talking to somebody today? This is political marketeering done under the auspices of public benevolence. This is political marketeering done under the auspices of public benevolence. But guess what? Benevolence is not public. It's an individual trait. The government does not have your interests at heart. You have your interests at heart. The government cannot instill responsibility into you. And the primary flaw of the vaccine passport ideology is that the government can instill responsibility into you, and that getting a vaccine automatically means you must be safe. Well, that's not really according to the data. Yeah, you're likely safe, but again, the data is still developing, number one. And number two, just because you're unvaccinated does not mean you're safe. Implicit into the idea that getting the vaccine means you're safe means that if you are unvaccinated, you are unsafe. And that is not true across all circumstances. Even the CDC will say that if you have gotten coronavirus and you have beat it, you have survived, you have the antibodies and you are okay. So even against the own science of the intelligentsia, even against the tomes of the intelligentsia, do we have these arguments failing? People, my God, people. Use that pensive fire within your mind, within your consciousness, to understand these issues. Because we are not understanding these damn issues, my friends. I'm not trying to curse, but it's just the truth. It's just the facts. Libertarians like me and everyone else, like Justin Amash, are correct about this for the reasons that I have laid out in this video, but we have to understand that in full epistemic humility. You have to shed your preconceptions, and you have to embrace what I'm trying to say to you, my friends. All right. Look, the vaccine passport business is no good. It's no good for all the reasons I stated. And I think that Amash is correct to call it dystopian. And I think that the government here is trying to be very sly in how it approaches this issue, when in all reality, it has its hands and fingerprints all over it. The government is involved, believe it or not. And in my opinion, you cannot coerce personal responsibility. In my opinion, personal responsibility is cultivated in the individual's heart, comes out through their mouth, their actions, their eyes, their ears, and it flows. But the government does not want this to flow. It wants this just to appear. The flow, the dynamic flow of human life, as Heraclitus understood, that flux, is so important to actualizing proper political sentiments that cohere with who we are as human beings, that cohere to who we are as individuals, that cohere to our natural state of liberty. Think on it. As always, my friends, I love you, and if you want to support my work, please, patreon.com/officialcwatson or PayPal, officialcwatson@gmail.com. It helps me a lot. I love you guys so much. Please comment, like, subscribe, share. I need the comments, guys. It helps me a lot. But as always, my friends, I love you, and please, you better stay pensive. Bye-bye.